So very briefly, it's 1994, and my arm has been blown out. I was pitching at Santa Clara, played a little bit of minor league baseball, and there goes the arm, and well, there goes that idea. So I'm going to be an agent at IMG. That sounds like a good career. My buddies call me and say, "Have you seen this internet thing?" And I'm a ball player. Internet? What's that? I went, no, this internet thing, this Netscape, this browser. And there were buddies that were about 3 years older than me. They were probably 25 at the time. They ran a multimedia video production shop, right? And we sat there for a whole weekend surfing this thing called the internet. And Sunday afternoon at 5 o'clock, after several beers, we decided we're going to build websites for people. Okay, great. And that started my digital career 20 years ago. Fast forward, I was chairman of AdTech, as many of you know. About 3 years ago, I see software is eating the world. And I started a conference called App Nation, of which we've done 10 App Nation events. So thank you, sir. Twice, both earlier in my life and then later in life, you've had a great impact, and I'm really glad you're here. Thank you very much. And Mr. Blackshaw, and we were just talking about this as, yeah, go ahead, Blackshaw, come on, yeah. We were just joking, it's a family reunion for Pete here as well, as much as it is for me, and I know so many people here are really happy to see Pete, as I am. Thank you for coming from Switzerland. So with these two gentlemen here, I feel very blessed that they've joined us for the inaugural Chief Digital Officer Forum, and I'm going to let you take it away, and thanks again for coming. Everyone enjoy dinner and enjoy the conversation. Pete?
Okay, great. Again, yeah, great to see some old friends, and we're going to have just a good back and forth conversation. And first thing I wanted to say, Marc, is just a thank you, because back in 93, first year of business school at Harvard, there was some guy in the tech department that showed me this crazy thing. It was a Mosaic browser, and I'll never forget, there actually was video. He actually had a video clip in there. Yeah. It was a very simple piece of content. It was just a toaster oven and the toast going up and down. But it was like we all have these aha, epiphany moments, and literally, I think within a half hour, I was at the business school newspaper, the Harbus, and I just said, I'm going to write an article every week, and I called it the Surf Report. And it was that Mosaic moment that literally got me thinking about digital, and I've literally not lost a bug. And actually, having talked to you just a few minutes before this, I kind of realized that we are still in just this incredible renaissance of innovation. It's just a different wave of technology. So great to have you here. Let's start by just let's talk a little bit about the firm.
Sure.
And what you're looking at, and maybe a little bit about just what differentiates your investment strategy relative to the zillions of other VCs that are out here?
Yeah, so my partner, Ben Horowitz, and I started a venture capital firm. We're coming up on our 5-year anniversary, which for a company is, for a Silicon Valley technology company, is starting to be old age. For a venture capital firm, is still very much a toddler, edging into having a big vocabulary. We have about $3 billion under management. We have a team of about 95 folks, and we are very aggressively. And I'll close with an introduction for the folks who are my colleagues who are here, so people can meet them. And we're very actively involved in trying to find the best and brightest of the new entrepreneurs and the serial entrepreneurs who are building the most interesting new companies. We think it's a really special time in the industry. We think in a lot of ways, a lot of the ideas from 20 years ago are happening now.
Yep.
In fact, one of our core theories is that every idea in the dot-com era that failed spectacularly was actually correct.
In fact, I was thinking of my next book, and it was going to be Too Damn Early.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Correct, but too damn early. And unfortunately, in our industry, early is the same as wrong. But the ideas, I can't tell you how many people come up to me who I knew in 93, 94, and I'm like, Facebook. I had social networking collaboration chat in 1994. Nobody used it. And so we think a lot of it's actually happening now, right? And a lot of that is because of the spread of broadband. A lot of that is the spread of mobile. And so we're looking for the killer apps. We're looking for the killer entrepreneurs. We have sort of a Platonic ideal of what we're looking for, which is the technical innovator, the founder, the genius, who then has the entrepreneurial gumption to start a company, who then has the willpower and determination and stubbornness to run the company.
Yep.
And so we're looking for, Mark Zuckerberg is sort of a case study of this. Ben Silbermann at Pinterest is a case study of this. In the old days, people like Bill Gates, Larry Ellison, Andy Grove are examples of this. And so we're looking for the really special people, the really big ideas, the really important companies, the really powerful technology changes. It's a really fun, it's an interesting business. It's to be in venture capital because you have such an amazing license to go find the really crazy ideas. And to literally give them money and see how they turn out. And sometimes you generate smoking craters in the ground. Sometimes the rocket ship at least gets into orbit. Sometimes it goes all the way to the moon. We have incredible investors and incredible partners who are completely supportive of all these new companies.
And what's the mix between the entrepreneurs that find you versus you finding them?
Yeah, so we get inbound about 3,000 deals a year through our referral network. And so those aren't over, this gives you an idea of the level of entrepreneurial activity happening in the world right now, is we get about 3,000 entrepreneurs coming in who are referred to us by people we already know. And so that could be people we've worked with in the past or other investors. Or other people in the ecosystem, and then on top of that is stuff that just comes in over the transom. But it's 3,000 a year that are basically it's a referral business. It's a relationship business. It's a referral business. So it's basically 3,000 theoretically qualified opportunities a year. Of those, about 1,600 of those are at the venture growth stage, so kind of companies where you might invest 5 to 10 million or above. Out of those 1,600 a year, we can maybe do 20. Okay. And so we like to say our day job is crushing entrepreneurs' hopes and dreams. It's a bizarre business. You say no all the time. You get actually really very interesting. Actually, you get very good at saying no because you ideally you don't want all the people you say no to hate you, and so you turn away an enormous number of people. But it's the diamond in the rough thing. You're constantly looking, filtering, searching. The other, of course, thing that you can imagine is you make mistakes, and so you say no, and then Larry Page, not in our case, thank God, but we weren't around then, but a whole bunch of venture capital firms said no to Larry Page, and he went down the street and raised money for Google. I guarantee you, get 3 drinks into those guys, and they are kicking themselves. And so the level of humility and the level of sort of nose to the ground and the level of mental flexibility to be able to wrap your head around these new ideas.
Now let's take the 3,000 and overlay this new dynamic we were talking about earlier around crowdfunding.
Yeah.
How does that change the equation?
Yeah.
Because here you have a model where you've got kind of this many points of funding at the early levels. You've got products actually being ordered before it actually kind of goes to market. Does that change the way you think about kind of running the numbers in terms of this has odds of success?
Yeah, so as everybody at this point probably knows what crowdfunding is, or at least what Kickstarter is. So the idea of crowdfunding we think is going very broad. We have an investment in our company. It's called CrowdTilt, which is really much more broadly commercializing the idea of crowdfunding. Interesting thing about Kickstarter is they have a very specific idea of what Kickstarter is useful for, which they basically is art projects, and so they specifically exclude both nonprofit projects and for-profit projects, which we attempted at one point to explain to them is in fact most of the world's economic activity. And they were not interested. And so we said, okay, we'll go find another company. And so we think there's an enormous wave happening of crowdfunding. Examples of this, in Hollywood, the Veronica Mars movie. I don't know if is that you guys? No, somebody else. Veronica Mars, big a cult TV hit. The people involved in it had been canceled several years ago, trying to get a movie made forever. They kept showing up in Hollywood with the script, the idea. They kept getting turned down. So they went on Kickstarter because it's an art project, and they raised $6 million for the movie from fans. But by the way, no movie, right? They haven't made the movie. Like they don't actually have a contractor. They don't have anybody signed up. But they raised $6 million from fans who want to see the movie, and they walk right back into the studios in Hollywood. And I am reliably told that if you have a script and $6 million, you have a much higher odds of getting greenlit than just a script. And sure enough, the movie's been greenlit. There's an independent video game that's the current record holder that's raised $26 million in advance of development. And then we're seeing a whole wave, especially of new consumer electronics companies who show up in our office and they've raised $5 or $10 million before they even, through literally pre-sales to customers, before they've begun development and before they've raised venture capital. It is an enormous, well, number one, we think it's just a very, very big deal because from an economic standpoint, so much of how the economy works, so much of how all of our companies work, so much of how all of your companies work is you have to guess what customers want, right? You design the product, you try to do test marketing and all this stuff, but like fundamentally, there's a lot of guesswork that takes place. You bring the product to market, you do all the advertising to try to generate demand, and then sometimes you hit and sometimes you miss. Well, with crowdfunding and crowdsourcing, you can know ahead of time whether there's demand for the product, which we think completely changes the nature of how you do ultimately product design, marketing, distribution, changes the relationship between product companies and retailers in really interesting ways. For us, it's also very exciting because it's such a strong signal. Because
Exactly.
a company walks in and it's the same thing. They walk in with $5 million of pre-orders. It's much easier for us to be able to to make the leap of faith.
And that's actually playing out in terms of how you're doing the investment strategy.
No, it's early, right? It's an early phenomenon. It's gonna be. These things are always rocky, right? And so, like right now, there's like on Kickstarter, as an example, there's now a big fraud problem, right? And so, so first it's the people who raise $5 million for a product that they're going to build. Next is the people who raise $5 million for a product they have no intention of building. And so, it's going to be an adaptation process, but it's extremely powerful, and we're seeing more and more companies that are coming in with serious companies with serious efforts. And I think more big companies are going to start to do this. I think, companies, athletic shoe companies and video game companies and movie companies and so forth are going to start doing this a lot.
So let's go from micro crowdfunding to currency.
Yeah.
How is currency evolving in the context of how we pay for things, evolution of e-commerce and the like? Is Bitcoin for real?
Yeah. So we talked, you mentioned sort of 1994 and mentioned the Mosaic and Netscape early on. My view is there was an original sin in how the internet got built, and which is we didn't give it the concept of money. And we should, if we had a time machine and we could go back in time, we could fix one thing about the internet, we would build in money. And that has played out in all kinds of ways. Including the whole the banner ad phenomenon and a desperate attempt to monetize things because you can't collect micropayments. It's turned into e-commerce is much harder than it should be because 20 years into the internet, consumers are still expected to type in their credit card number and the code and the expiration date and the billing address and the shipping address and then there's all the chargeback fraud. So there's all these issues with fraud, which is a huge issue for e-commerce. And then there's even spam. Like the reason there's spam is because it's free. It's basically free to send out bulk emails. If there had been a charging mechanism in place, if you could charge people to put an email in your basket if you haven't previously communicated with them, you could essentially eliminate spam. And we just didn't we literally just didn't have time. We didn't have it was mostly academics at one point, and so money was not the thing that was high up on the list to build in. So this is where Bitcoin enters the picture. So there's a whole bunch of innovation happening in payments, and a lot of it is very practical and can be used today, and we have a bunch of very interesting companies. But the big thing happening right now is Bitcoin. And this one is we think Bitcoin is extremely important. It's very challenging right now to talk about Bitcoin. Number one, because it's very complicated, and nobody in the press understands it yet. And so just take whatever you've read in the press and just ignore it, because they literally don't understand it. And then two is the Winklevosses are supporting it. And I can't tell you how painful that is. We set up a call with our. We were about to start making investments in Bitcoin a while back, and we were going to set up a call for our investors because we had to explain to them what we're doing, investing in essentially what is a made-up fake cryptographic currency. And we had our explanation. We had 80 slides, and we had the whole thing all completely explained. And then 3 days before the call, the Winklevosses announced they were supporting it. And we get on the phone, and we're like, let's start with the Winklevosses, and then let's work our way backwards. So notwithstanding that.
That aside.
It's a little So it's like Bernie Madoff comes out in favor of your mutual fund. It's just a bad. It's just a bad scene.
But this is a real deal.
Notwithstanding that, it's a real deal. And so it's basically, if the internet had money, it would be Bitcoin. And so if we knew then what we knew now, we would have built Bitcoin in from the very beginning, and it would have literally been Bitcoin. It only got invented a few years ago. It took a long time to figure it out. But it did get built. It is the ideal match of money to the internet. It is a really, really elegant, amazing system. And we think it's going to be a really big deal. The capsule explanation for why it's such a big deal is basically it's being represented as part of the press represents it as a currency. And there is a currency, but the currency is not the main thing. The main thing is think of it as a distributed ledger. So think of it as literally an internet of money. So think of it as a ledger that's spread all across the internet, all over the planet, and basically anybody in any country at any time can put value into the ledger, like in Palo Alto, and then somebody in Shanghai, 2 seconds later can take money out of the ledger. And it just works. It's completely cryptographically secure. You know exactly who put the money in. You know exactly who's taking the money out. The money can only be put in or taken out once. Every individual entry in the ledger has complete provenance, so you know exactly who's dealt with each piece of currency throughout the history of that piece of currency. You completely think about the things you eliminate. You completely eliminate all the cross-border trade, all the cross-border currency issues. You completely eliminate currency exchange. You completely eliminate transaction fees, and you completely eliminate fraud, chargeback fraud. And then you can do this all the way to, credit cards, you still have these minimum thresholds for the size of the transaction. Like below $3, it becomes economically difficult to do the transaction. Bitcoin, you can take it all the way down to micro pennies, and it works just as elegantly as it does for $10,000.
But the generic label for this is, you call it cryptographic currency.
Cryptographic currency. Yeah. So it's the same technology that if you use, it's the same technology used for e-commerce, when you go to a website and you have a cryptographically secure connection to send your credit card number. It's that same kind of math, but applied to this much deeper idea of money. This is going to be a big deal. This is going to, this is already attracting enormous amounts of debate from a regulatory standpoint. This was actually a big week for Bitcoin this week. Ben Bernanke, there was a Senate hearings on this topic, and Ben Bernanke wrote a letter, and he said he thinks it's for real, and he thinks it has very real applications. A bunch of government agencies this week were very supportive. Treasury Department was very supportive of it. And then the other really interesting thing, so that's like in the U.S. Where, in the U.S. we're lucky we have a relatively good currency. Then think about all the countries around the world that have terrible currencies and terrible governments, right? And so think about being in Cyprus, right? Or think about being in many other countries that just have think about Venezuela, with hyperinflation. There's
insurance.
What's that?
It's a form of insurance.
Yeah, exactly right.
Yeah.
And think of the alternative. At first blush, again, it's like it's a currency made out of math, and so it's literally a string of numbers. And so how could that have value? And it's like, well, how else are you going to store value? You basically gold, art. The number of mechanisms to be able to travel around the world with value is actually very limited, and this one works incredibly well. So we think it's going to be a really big deal. We think it's going to get built into all kinds of applications and services. It's the very early stages. It reminds us a lot of the internet in '93, right? Which is everybody's kind of like, really? Like, seriously? Sometimes that means something really is crazy, but sometimes that means it's for real.
So did everybody get that? Cryptographic currency.
Exactly.
Okay. That's a good one.
Ask all the nerds in your life.
Now let's pivot
ask your 14-year-old sons.
Now let's pivot to one of my favorite subjects.
And daughters.
Sensors.
Yes.
Okay. And I remember when I was leading digital at P&G, we'd bring in Paul Saffo from Institute for the Future, and he would swear that was the next big thing. Yeah. But I don't think any of us have really felt it until just the last 12 months or so, because we're all wearing, variations of this. Price points are going down. Is this the real deal? And where is it going to go? And how is it going to kind of change our world from many different angles, starting with big companies that are, selling products like ours?
Yeah, so basically sensors have become chips, or chips have become sensors. And so there's this huge revolution happening in semiconductors, companies like Qualcomm and Intel, that are building sensors into chips and turning chips into sensors. And so the price of cameras, you see this with every device you buy now that has a high definition camera in it. So cameras, and then all kinds of other sensors, location sensors, pulse monitors, and all kinds of things. The new beacon functionality in the iPhone is another really good example. And so sensors are getting incredibly cheap, and therefore sensors are going to be everywhere. Basically, chips and sensors in literally everything. A lot of that you can kind of see
cheaper
today.
and smaller,
and exponential growth of units. And so, like, cameras are an obvious example, right? I mean, the planet is being blanketed with cameras. On the one hand, Orwell was right in that there's going to be cameras everywhere, and we're going to be watched everywhere. On the other hand, Orwell was wrong, because we are also ourselves all going to have cameras. And every time, in the future, all interactions with police officers are going to be recorded by several different video cameras for the purpose of subsequent, court cases and arguments. By the way, those of you who don't, there's a whole genre.
I have seen Big Brother, and it is me.
It is. There's a whole genre on YouTube of traffic accidents in Russia, which is just absolutely fascinating, because it turns out, because of all the insurance fraud, there's all this car insurance fraud in Russia, it's become very common in Russia now to have front and rear mounting. Actually, Russia and Los Angeles.
Thank you. That's my hometown.
In all seriousness. So in Russia, they'll drive around now with cameras running full time, forward and back on every car. And so every accident is on video, which is why they had the footage of the meteor when it landed, is because all the cars, it was all the cameras mounted in all the cars, and they had a whole bunch of footage of that. So imagery is everywhere. From a health and wellness standpoint, these gizmos, which I know a lot of people here have, these gizmos are going to be packed with sensors in the future. And so these are going to have, this is a Jawbone Up. There's other products, Nike and Fitbit and others. They're going to be packed with sensors for things like pulse and blood pressure, and they're going to be used for a wide variety of health applications, wellness applications. And then there's my favorite example, which is a company we're not invested in, but I'm just completely fascinated by, which is a company called Proteus Health, which is putting a sensor in every pill. And it's really interesting because it literally is putting a chip in every pill. Now, the chip is tiny and completely digestible, which is important. But that's not the funny part. The funny part is that the way this thing works is they put a chip in every pill, and then you take the pill. 2 minutes after you take the pill, it's dissolved enough where the sensor comes in contact with your body. And then if you remember from being in science class as a kid and you built the potato clock, where you had the little digital clock, and then you use literally you plug in the potato, and the potato is the battery. Your body is the potato in this case. This little chip in the pill literally lights up for 2 minutes and sends basically a signal out to your armband or your smartwatch or your smartphone, and basically says, essentially says, "Hello, I've been swallowed. Like I am a pill, and I am currently being digested." And it turns out in medical care, this would be a very, very, very big deal. For example, there are lots of medical protocols where the frequency and the precision with which people take their pills, take their meds, has an enormous outcome on how they do with very serious conditions. But then apply, obviously, this concept more broadly. There's no reason the same technology over time can't get embedded into all food. And when it's embedded into all food, then all of a sudden you're going to have a completely quantified experience, right? Like, for example, this thing right now can track in great detail all of your physical activity, all of your motion, all of your sleep. Yeah. It's going to be able to track things like pulse and blood pressure in the future, but it can't currently tell what you're eating. You have to tell it what you're eating. And in the future, there will actually be an opportunity to have a completely different approach to food and nutrition, as well as medical care based on this kind of thing.
By the way, next to my sensor is my Rainbow Loon bracelet that my daughter made for me. Did you guys invest in these guys?
We have not yet.
Because if you didn't, that was a big miss.
Yeah.
This thing.
Yeah. Is there a chip in there and it talks to you? Is that
all I know is that someone gave my wife one of these, and my daughter was just on fire. And there's all these videos on YouTube that kind of show them how to do it. And so when she went back to the States, she kind of came back with all this contraband Rainbow Loon stuff. She's been dishing them out all over. Great example, though, just of kind of an analog kind of a toy that just is like.
It's very color coordinated with your.
She's very good. Oh yeah, if anybody wants to, start a fundraising thing. Let's talk about TV, media, content. What are your thoughts on the evolution of TV as we know it today?
Sure. So I think there's no question we're in a golden age for television. I think it's just absolutely extraordinary. The creative art of television is just absolutely extraordinary. And I think the people in the audience know a lot more about this than I do, but I think the business side has gotten a lot more exciting as a consequence of all the new distribution technologies.
Yeah.
A few years ago, friends of mine in the TV business were saying that TV's doomed because there's not going to be a way to make money. Once DVDs go, that's it. And now there's all these new revenue streams from places like Netflix. So I think we're in a renaissance of television from a production and creativity standpoint. That said, I think the cable bundle is on the verge of collapse. I think it's melting like an ice cube, and at some point it goes critical. And I think that the odds that and I don't know exactly at what time frame. I mean, it's one of these things. It's like the old. Remember in the old days, when you used to get your telephone service, it was from one company called AT&T. You used to lease. You remember you used to lease your telephone from AT&T, and then the telephone came in one color, black, with one cord, 10 feet. And AT&T's technicians swore up and down that if you plugged any other phone to the network, it would kill the entire network. A friend of mine was at AT&T. We were talking about this yesterday, and she pointed out even 20 years later, when that whole regime had long since fallen apart, there were still 3 million people in the U.S. who were still leasing their telephones. In fact, I think there's still 3 million people in the U.S. today who are leasing their telephones, right? Which makes no economic sense at all. And so I think the cable bundle is going to follow a very similar path. I think every day that goes by, there's more content in the bundle that's now available outside the bundle. Yeah. And every day there's an announcement. Yesterday it was the announcement DirecTV is making 30 channels available, streaming outside the home on top of the 80 channels or something that are available in the home. HBO shows are now available on iTunes, which didn't used to be the case. More TV shows are getting their own websites, and all the content's being made available, streaming websites. And so I think this kind of, one-size-fits-all, cross-subsidized, 15% annual escalation pricing scheme connected to linear programming, connected to cable or broadcast technologies, it's just not the future.
Yeah.
The future is internet streaming distribution. This is obviously a gigantic technology change. It's a gigantic business model change. I think it's going to be a big deal.
Yeah, I agree too. I, having been a digital passionista, I always found myself in an antagonistic relationship with TV because that was the budget I was always trying to get. And then when I had sold my company to Nielsen, I started to dive into their data. I was always kind of amazed at how the TV consumption was actually going up. Mm-hmm. And that's partly because in a world of fragmentation, these devices allow you to consume TV anywhere, whether it's the bathroom or whatever it might be. And that creates huge opportunities. It's just not the same centralized model that we had before. The other thing that I've found interesting is, I think there is this emerging story around the convergence of digital and TV from especially from a social perspective.
Right.
So it seems like everyone from Facebook to Twitter, even Google have a story about how the digital elements kind of complement the TV, and I buy into a lot of that. I do think it creates some very interesting questions around what type of programming is going to be most relevant to drive those synergies. Yeah. Like from a Nestle perspective, I'm asking myself is, maybe it's live programming because that's where you're going to kind of maximize earned media impact off of the programming elements because of the amplification on Twitter and the like.
I think live programming is going to become much more important and valuable. And then I think also, sponsorship. I think there's a return to the 1950s that's going to happen. Obviously, product placements become much bigger recently, but sponsorships, I think it's going to make a lot more sense.
I was thinking about that because we sponsor Roland Garros and Tour de France, and then most recently Nespresso sponsored the America's Cup, and I've got this great photo, notwithstanding the fact that our team lost. The great photo of I think the last day, I think every single person had a camera phone.
Yeah, right.
And what I've been kind of thinking about is what's the incremental value of the earned media in a world of sponsorship? So it can kind of go back to your point about, certain things that we dismissed at one point might actually be more valuable, especially as we develop better measurements for kind of understanding the upside.
Yeah, and then even then in that case, blending of professional content and professional event with all the amateur footage, right? So one of the things, there's a whole bunch of attempts. People haven't figured this out yet. The killer app hasn't emerged yet, but if you just view everybody in a crowd has a camera phone, everybody's taking photos and video. One of the things you should have out of every sporting event is you literally have a comprehensive video coverage of everything that's happened.
Everything.
And there ought to be a way to pull all that stuff in right off of everybody's phone and create a composite of the entire thing and be able to view things from every angle.
From every angle.
Yeah, and do all that stuff. And there's a whole bunch of entrepreneurs that are trying to build apps that do that. It hasn't yet been cracked, but it feels very close.
The key is to figure out how the sponsors get comfortable with those alternative models, because a lot of them are almost like these choke point models that really kind of limit how you integrate the user content into the program. We see a lot of that with the Olympics, right?
Right, but that's where if you build the brand into the event itself, right? Then it's sort of what's the best right? My view, the best advertising is content, right? I mean the best way is to be so deeply embedded that you're actually part of the valuable content. And in that case, if people want to film it from 80 different angles with 60 different Instagram filters, let them have it.
So let me ask you about. Put yourself in my shoes. So lead digital for Nestle, and just to kind of put things in perspective, we sell 1.2 billion products every day. In social media, on Facebook alone, we're publishing 1,500 pieces of content every day. That's before you count comments and reactions and all that stuff. How do we we just created a Silicon Valley Outpost. A couple of our folks are here that are leading that effort. what role can we play with the VCs? You know, where do we add value? Where do we slow things down?
Yeah.
How should we be thinking about, connecting with, not only kind of the proven startups, but maybe,
Yep.
the ones that are in that 3,000 list that might have some
Yep.
strategic relevance to our business.
Yeah, so I think there's a bunch of things.
And we're focusing on healthcare big time.
Yeah. So I think there's a bunch of things. So I think that I think especially the kinds of companies represented here tonight have an enormously important role to play. The way I describe that is all the companies, all the startups we deal with, they all have this incredibly daunting problem, which is they've got some, what they hope is an amazing new technology, but the world is a gigantic place. And how are they ever going to actually get this technology out to the world? How are they ever going to have an impact on a broad scale so it's not just a new gizmo in a lab somewhere that nobody ever sees? And so, it's so funny when you're in a big company, it always feels like we can't innovate fast enough, or it feels like we don't have new ideas. When you're in a startup, it's always like, oh my God, we can't actually get to market. We can't ever actually have the impact that we want to have. And so we believe there's an enormous collaboration opportunity between the best leading edge technology companies and the best big brands and the best agencies and the best retailers and the best of big companies. There's obviously a bunch of ways to screw it up on both sides. We could talk about those at length. The key to it, we think, on the way to do it right is have the right kind of communication, that have a lot of communication. And so we would certainly encourage, obviously, people on the ground, especially here, I think is a very good idea. FaceTime is the heart of this. One of the things we encourage, we think more big companies ought to do two things in particular. One is there ought to be a lot more rotation programs, in our view. If I were running a big company, or all the big companies I'm involved in, basically have as part of the career development path for all the up and coming folks in the company, have them rotate through the valley, or have them rotate through tech, or have them rotate through whatever the new sort of the new ideas hub is for the business. And so have it so not necessarily a lifetime appointment, but some cases that works well, but have it actually be like a rotation program.
We have to make sure they rotate back.
Yes. That is also an important part. The other is, I think corporate venture capital is really underutilized, is a really underexploited opportunity for all sides. Corporate venture capital has had historically a bad reputation because what's happened is when the stock market is booming and when Silicon Valley is on fire, a whole bunch of big companies launch corporate venture capital programs, pile a ton of money into startups, and then just get slaughtered.
Or they send the startups in the wrong direction.
Yeah, yeah.
So they lock their hands.
Yeah, there is that. Yeah, the terms that can come with that. So there's sort of, and then of course what happens is, and this happened in 2000, a bunch of the corporate VC programs got taken apart, and then people pulled back. Of course, buy high, sell low, and then when it would have been a really good time to invest between 2005 and 2009, they were gone. But I think that's because the motivation is too profit-oriented, ironically. I think the purpose of corporate venture capital should be strategic and should be precisely around your question, which is how do we plug in all the new ideas? And it's the same, it's the same thing I said with the Veronica Mars movie. Like showing up with hi, I'm here and I want to talk is the only thing better than that is hi, I'm here, I want to talk and I have a checkbook. And speaking, as a venture capitalist on behalf of the venture capital community, we wouldn't necessarily want big companies to compete with us, but our companies end up raising over time lots of money. Our companies end up having lots of partnerships with big companies that they can work with, and having an appropriate investment role, I think can be very good. It can be a hook, to make these relationships serious. So I think there's huge underexploited opportunity. And then, just to acknowledge on the downside, a couple pieces of downside. I mean, one of the things that goes wrong is, small companies are small companies, and so sometimes they blow up, and sometimes they fail, or sometimes they don't live up to their obligations. And one of the things we work with our portfolio companies a lot on is when you tell Nestle that you're going to do something, like you have to be serious, and we have to be serious as your investor behind you, that this thing is going to work. The other side is, big companies do have a tendency, especially the really big ones, they do have a tendency to smother startups to death. And so, we're the 30 people from Nestle and we're here to help you is not necessarily as attractive as we're the 2 key people from Nestle and we're here to help you. And I think big companies, the best of the big companies, are getting much better at that. I think that's becoming, people are becoming sharper. I'll just we work with a bunch of companies, but GE had taken, I think, a very, very good approach out here. Comcast has been very effective. I think that who else? Citibank actually has been extremely effective. Ford Motor Company has been out here a lot. And so there are more and more case studies of how this is done really well.
And what's more important, the investment side or just being a really good customer?
It
moves really fast.
Being a really good customer, the interesting, being a really good customer. Yeah. So Scott McNeely used to say the best strategic partnership is a purchase order. And that is hard to argue with. So being a customer, as Arnold Rothstein said on Boardwalk Empire, nothing says I'm sorry like money. That is very valuable. But that said, it's not always the right time at the point of contact, first contact with the company of like, okay, hand over money. They may not be ready yet. The thing about the investment is the investment is a catalyst to build a relationship. And that is a very big, and by the way, this is the other thing is, I'm not talking about huge amounts of money. I'm talking about, a rounding error on a rounding error on big company balance sheets as a hook for the conversation with startups. And then with the very nice side benefit of the conversation, the relationship deepening over time, obviously then shared success, when things work, then, obviously there's mutual success on both sides. And then kind of setting up the right dynamic, setting up a collaborative, supportive, high bandwidth communication dynamic to then ultimately do business together.
Okay. Yeah, I remember when I had started a company in 2000 that, it's just... there were some companies that just would help you move fast. They'd kind of pay an honest, honest invoice, so to speak.
Yeah.
And then a lot of the big companies just strung you out, and or maybe had an elevated sense of the value that the name brought. And I think what entrepreneurs they need, the customers early, and they just got to also move really fast. Because sometimes the selling cycle would bury the companies. Yeah. And we were lucky enough to have a few customers that would allow us to move relatively fast, but you learn some really harsh lessons. And what I've been trying to think from a Nestle perspective is that, okay, given my own entrepreneurial experience, like what's that right formula where we can really, add value, or it's a kind of a clear exchange.
Well, the other thing is, right, big companies obviously used to deploying large amounts of money. For startups, for a brand new startup, $1 million order is like a big deal early on. And so, in the context of a large marketing budget, right, that's just, in context, it's a small amount of money. And so, and a lot of the top marketers, a lot of people in the room, you have allocations in your budget for experimentation and for trials. And I think that's an incredible opportunity, both to explore these ideas as well as to work with these startups early on. And so it's, but having a different expectation on that, having a different interface path, kind of your point, a different decision-making process to be able to really make sure you're connected to the new ideas and that the companies you're working with are able to move fast, despite the fact that, they will typically have fewer employees than you have people you send to the meeting.
Quick word on content. I'm sure, I wasn't here earlier, I saw some of the tweets, but I'm sure content was a big theme. But huge number of players. Quite a bit of fragmentation. Will there be a shakeout? Are we going to see more consolidation in that area? I just got back from Salesforce, their event, and they got the big players like Buddy Media and Oracle's in that business, but you've got a lot of small niche players out there. Are we just going to see a lot of innovation there before it consolidates, or any thoughts there?
Yeah, so I think on the professional content side, I think there's going to be an explosion of sources. So for example, in the news business, right, the news industry across all the different forms of media, I think is actually it's another Back to the Future thing. It's actually going back to the 1930s and before. Right, so the phenomenon of 3 broadcast networks and 3 cable news networks and 1 local newspaper, is really only an artifact since the 1940s, 1950s. Yeah. Back in the 1930s and before, every city had 5, 10, 15 newspapers. If you go back actually even earlier in time, in the colonial era, like there were lots and lots and lots of newspapers, right? All of which had a very distinct point of view, and there were pitched ideological battles between them, very much like what you see with blogs today. And so because distribution on the internet has taken, it costs zero, there's just going to be an explosion of voices. There's going to be an explosion of content providers. There's actually tons of startups. There's tons of new media companies being formed. BuzzFeed is probably the best in class right now. Is the one we probably have, think is sort of the leading sort of example of what's possible. But there are many other fantastic ones that are growing up. Are you going to get another Time Warner out of it? Not necessarily. On the other hand, maybe was Time Warner an artifact of the 1950s to the 1990s? Possibly, right? And maybe we're just going to be in a more fragmented world. The other side is, I think content, we've lived in this world for a while where content only comes from content companies. I think content is going to increasingly come from everybody. We're actually an example of that. We actually hired we hired a reporter at my venture capital firm, and I can guarantee you, based on that experience, if you want to get the attention of every reporter in the world, hire a reporter. It is like high alert, antenna go up, dogs watching television. Oh my God. Every other reporter called us and was like, why did you hire a reporter? It's like the most exciting thing that we've ever done. So like we're in the content business. And why are we in the content business?
Didn't Pinterest just bring in a big reporter from like
Oh, did they? Oh, I actually didn't see that. Yeah. Well, so these
Chronicle or something?
and over time, Twitter has had, and Tumblr, and a lot of these companies end up with Google, end up. So, and we're not the only other venture capital firms recently that have hired reporters. So, I would say this goes back to kind of, the best advertising is good content. Why do we need a reporter? We need a reporter because the stuff that we do is complicated and new.
Yeah.
Things like Bitcoin, and we
have to do better than cryptographic, right?
Yes, we need to explain it in English to normal human beings. And so, but look, we think we develop a deep understanding, or at least we try very hard, and then we want to explain these things, and these things are complicated, and the world's moving fast. And so we're trying to take more responsibility to being able to articulate complex subjects to large audiences. And so I think that the spectrum of companies that are going to be involved in literally, it's like you said, the number of, like you said, the number of posts that just Nestle does on Facebook. I think every company, the communications functions in many companies has been try to get reporters working for newspapers to write the right things. I think increasingly it's direct communication.
Now let's go from reporters to just the rest of your team or staff. I mean, what are you looking for when you're recruiting your talent? I think we're all probably asking questions about what's the formula for the teams that we build. Are we looking for folks that have been in the company for a while? Are we looking for entrepreneurs? Are we looking for, I often ask myself, I talk a lot about this notion of what I call digital dualisms, which are these tension points, integration versus stimulation. And oftentimes I'm kind of looking for that stimulant that really kind of shakes up the organization, knowing that eventually it kind of all needs to kind of integrate. But when you're recruiting for, you got a couple of your colleagues here, what are you looking for?
Well, there's what we're looking for, and then there's what all of our companies are looking for.
Okay, let's cover both.
Yeah, so we're looking for, we're small. We're small. We're large for a venture capital firm, but we're small for a company, so we're 95 folks. And kind of our global world ambitions is maybe we'll get to 130 or something, right?
Okay.
So we're not looking for huge numbers of people. And so we're looking, and I'll talk about my colleagues in a little bit, but we're looking for people who are really sharp and have their nose to the ground and really understand what's happening. And so we tend to hire actually a lot of people
sensors
out of tech companies. Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. Part of it is the intellectual content of the changes that are happening and deep technology implications, and then part of it is a social exercise, which is it's because of the referral network. It's knowing everybody turns out to be an enormous part of what we do. And so getting enough people, the founders of the firms are introverts, and so getting enough extroverts in the firm who can be at all the events and meet everybody and know everybody is a really big deal. Collaboration is a really big deal. Team players, we're trying to operate as a single firm.
So what's interesting about that? We have one of the largest kind of implementations of Chatter, similar to Yammer, but it's basically an internal version of Facebook. And lately, as I've been kind of looking at resumes and kind of building my team, I've been spending more and more of my time looking at the employees' Chatter profile, which is pretty interesting because you can actually get some really good, it's almost like an internal version of LinkedIn. Yeah. Are they high in influence? Are they promoters, or do people actually like their content? Yeah. And you can actually learn a lot by looking at social media patterns, because for me, what really matters is, I really do believe in the sharing philosophy. Yep. If you're not good at sharing, especially in a large, radically decentralized company like Nestle, you're off the list.
Yep.
You're off the list because you want people that really are very, very good connectors, good sensors, and they're just really good at very intuitively kind of trading information. Yep. And so I think your rule applies as much to the large enterprise, maybe more so in the large enterprise where a lot of us kind of desperately need external focus. So, any other points on talent? Now let's talk about the company side.
Yeah.
Okay.
So on the company side, the war for talent is even more intense than it was in the late 90s. It is just at an absolute fever pitch. All of our companies are just dying for people. And in particular, and it's actually across domains. It's, programmers is sort of the classic, but it's also designers, and it's data scientists, and it's product managers, and by the way, it's also salespeople, marketing people, and PR people.
There's hope for all of us.
Finance. People are dying. It's an enormous problem. It's an enormous challenge. If we had 3 times the number of people in the Valley with those skill sets, we could easily have 3 times the amount of output in terms of both innovation and in terms of companies. And so people are just dying. The thing we've been working a lot on, which is I think maybe an interesting broader topic, is with our companies is our companies all have this problem we call too hungry to eat, right? Which is they're just so desperate for talent that they just need to go get somebody who has a specific skill set today. And so they all go try to recruit essentially from each other. And so it's this giant feeding frenzy where they're all trying to recruit from Google and Google's are trying to recruit from them. And it's just kind of this nightmare. It's kind of dystopian kind of labor market. It's like these companies are ripping people out from each other all the time. And
Pinterest looks a lot like Facebook 4 years ago.
Yeah. Like literally a lot of and Facebook looked a lot like Google at one point, and the cycle repeats. And there's something to that, which is the people who are really good are able to fully maximize their skills and their opportunity by going to these different places, and there's a magic to it, but it's really brutal. And it's hard to run a company when you don't know if you're resting on a stable foundation of people who are really loyal and are really with you. So what we've been telling our companies is something that I think needs to happen across the entire economy more and more, which is, number one, sourcing. The idea of sourcing has to change, and in particular, college recruiting has to become much more serious for many companies. And in particular, college recruiting specifically outside of the Ivy League, frankly, outside of, there's 6 or 8 or 10 schools that everybody focuses on. This is true to a shocking degree in Silicon Valley. I would have never imagined how focused Silicon Valley would be on the Ivy League, which, is sort of, Silicon Valley prides itself on being anti-establishment to a certain amount, and we just die to get people out of Harvard and Stanford. And it's there's actually a very large number.
I'm first a banana slugger before a Harvard guy.
Got it. Well, they're fantastic. The reason why you want to recruit people out of those places is because they're so well selected, and then they're so well educated. But there's an enormous number of schools, and in particular state universities, and then there's so many smart people coming from all over the world now, coming out of the developing world, and coming out of China, coming out of India, and all these countries. And so going more broad and having a much broader intake, especially on younger people, is I think a very big opportunity, but requires a big investment. And think of it from a startup standpoint. This is something we try to help our companies with because it's very hard. In the middle of everything you're trying to do as a startup to try to go figure out how to recruit at 15 different state schools. So one is the intake, and then the other is training and development. I think our companies systematically are too weak on helping people evolve in their careers and develop new skills, and I think that same thing is true across the entire economy, and you almost can't be too good at it. The classic example in the Valley right now is everybody needs iOS programmers, and so everybody's out trying to recruit the same. It feels like there's only 3,000 iOS programmers in the Valley, and everybody's trying to recruit them all. It's well, you've got in a lot of these companies, you've got Java programmers, and you've got PHP programmers, and you've got web programmers. It's take 4 months, and we actually there's a training company we work with called Big Nerd Ranch, and they're spectacular. They literally are it's Big Nerd Ranch. It's well, you send people off, and they train them on how to be iOS programmers at the Big Nerd Ranch. Yeah, everybody's writing that down. He's pointing to somebody who's been there. And so, train people up on how to do these things. We have another company called Udacity that does this kind of training now online and is rolling out all these tracks to be able to train people how to do mobile development or how to train people how to do data science. And so I think that the development, career path, skills training is going to be such a more fundamental part of how the economy works. And I think it has to be. Because today we're all hiring mobile developers. 3 years from now we're all going to need to hire neural implant developers or whatever it's going to be.
I love it.
And we're going to have that exact same problem again.
Big Nerd Ranch and cryptographic camp, right?
Yes, exactly.
Now let's have a little fun.
Yep.
So your mobile phone.
Mm-hmm.
All right. What apps are in your mobile phone that you haven't invested in? Okay.
Oh.
What's that?
Oh, I don't have that yet. Oh, yeah, after, yeah, exactly.
What's on the first interface?
So
Marc Andreessen.
I would say 2 things. One is Waze. Waze company is, if you haven't seen it, called WAZE, and Google bought it, and very successful outcome. Yeah, it's so fascinating. This is one of those ideas where you first hear it, you're that's crazy, that'll never work, and then it turns out it works incredibly well. So it's literally crowdsourced maps and crowdsourced traffic. And after, there is a funny part to the idea, right? Which is literally people.
Idea.
Which is the slightly scary part of the idea is people when they're driving are on their smartphone saying, boy, there's a lot of traffic today. Crash. But it's a very powerful phenomenon. It's now being layered into Google Maps, and so it's going to become standard for everything. And so it's a great outcome. A great Israeli company, very, very great team, great outcome. The other one is Tesla. Tesla is an app on my phone because if you have a Tesla, it's the first car that comes with its own app. And like I've got the app on the phone, and like literally, like if my, where's my car? Where did I park my car? Has my car been stolen? If it has, where is it? It's hot out in the middle of summer. It's hot outside. Turn on the air conditioner. Did I lock it before I got out?
Will it actually activate the?
Yeah. So you can control the climate system. Right now, you can control the climate system. You can control the windows, and then you can do all the monitoring of a lot of aspects of the car. The charge, doesn't have enough charge to get me home. And that's today. That's today. It doesn't yet. You can't yet drive the car from the app. That's still a few years off. But I just love the fact that I just love the fact that Tesla is succeeding the way that it is. But I just love the fact, and the keynote is that Tesla's the first car that has a built-in wireless connection. Mm-hmm. Like Tesla itself is basically a laptop on wheels. It's a rolling computer, and so I get a huge kick out of the fact that it's always on the network, which has all kinds of benefits when you're in the car, like internet radio. You can listen to every radio station on the planet, which is really cool. But also the fact that you can get to the car from your smartphone. And then also, by the way, if those of you haven't been in the new Tesla Model S, it's the first car with a built-in web browser, which is also really cool and also very dangerous on the big screen when you're in traffic reading CNN.
Anything else? Anything else that we're that you haven't invested in?
Those are the big ones. There's all kinds of stuff. Another car-related thing we haven't invested in, but I'm a huge fan of. I don't have it yet, but a lot of people are getting it. There's a new car insurance company called Metro Mile. That plugs a little dongle into the standardized maintenance port on your engine, and it does real-time pricing of car insurance, which it turns out has all kinds of consequences, right? Because car insurance is one of these things where, right, 80% of the good drivers subsidize 20% of the bad drivers. With this, the insurance companies trying to price these things have very crude data about what they're actually getting. This literally instruments every car with sensors. Does all kinds of really cool things for pricing. But the other cool thing, it does things like it's able to fingerprint drivers, right? And so it can tell the difference between you and your 20-year-old son driving the car based on things like, do you come to a complete stop at stop signs? And it can actually differentiate, not today, but it will be able to differentially price insurance depending on who's driving the car.
Nice.
And so that kind of thing is going to be a really big deal. We're very heavily involved in Lyft, which is one of the big drive ride-sharing apps. Uber is the other company in that category. There's a whole bunch of interesting stuff.
I did my first Uber ride the other day.
Yeah, exactly.
It's amazing. I love it's really coming down.
It's such a big deal. It's actually, there's a whole set of delivery services that are going to launch. The whole concept of home delivery is going to change because when you can actually know where the driver is. It's
a logical extension of that.
Yeah, it is. It's a really big deal. And what's so interesting is, this is what I find interesting with this industry today is these are all like everything we just talked about, transportation-related topics, and they all really, really seriously affect how transportation works, how delivery works, how logistics works, and they're all based on the smartphone, right? So they're all elaborations off the power of the smartphone, the power of the sensors, the power of the network.
Okay, last question.
Yeah.
So you're the person who's just kind of nailed it many, many times in terms of where the future's going, but you're on a desert island. And you only have a choice of 5 folks or sources. You can either follow, 5 people on Twitter or, tune into just a couple sources. I mean, how do you keep your competitive edge? Like, who's going to be on that list?
To stay current.
To stay current.
To know what's going on.
Bleeding edge.
So I'm going to give you names of people you've never heard of.
That's what we're looking for, man.
Who are up-and-comers.
Okay.
Some of whom we're trying to hire. I won't tell you which ones.
Okay.
Bloggers.
I want names.
Bloggers. Ben Evans.
Ben Evans.
Ben Evans is absolutely extraordinary. What's his Thompson? Is it also Ben Thompson? Is anybody? There's another. There's this new generation of analysts. So Ben Evans, Ben Thompson, and then there's a guy in Europe named Horace Dediu, who is a Finnish former Nokia internal analyst who has by far the best blog on mobile technology and covers it extensively. There's another guy, Steve Cheney. I just find this so I read the Wall Street Journal, I read all the mainstream press, but the number of domain experts, and this is the content fragmentation
Absolutely.
thing. The number of domain experts in all these different fields who are now lighting up and all of a sudden becoming independent publishers and are often extremely insightful, sometimes because they're actual practitioners.
They're going to get paid with Bitcoin.
Yeah, and they're going to get paid with Bitcoin. This guy Horace actually said he was at Nokia back in the heyday, and then Nokia went sideways, and so he left, and so he's just this amazing blogger on the topic of mobile development of the mobile industry. But he's literally working like on his own. He's trying to figure out should he do sponsorships or whatever, and so I saw he did an interview one time with another blogger, and he basically said, what's your biggest thing you need right now? And he says, I need a new Mac, I need a new computer, and so I sent him an iMac. He's literally as a thank you for like all of his absolutely amazing work. And he will go on. These guys now will end up getting snarfed up, and they'll end up working for sort of Nate Silver kind of came came out of this vector. And so it's going to be a really interesting environment for really, really sharp people with very, very strong, deep insights to be able to really contribute. And then and this is the thing. I mean, this is people sort of there's this whole sort of thing and the sort of this theory of like the press. Basically, without the old business model of the media, without the old newspaper business model and profits, how are you going to ever have investigative journalism? How are you ever going to have good objective coverage of what's happening? And somehow it's all going to fall apart, and we're just all going to just be subject to propaganda all the time. And I think it's the exact opposite. Well, we're going to get all the propaganda, but I think the number of really smart people in the world who are now going to be able to express themselves is going to rise dramatically, and the world's going to be a much better place because of that.
Outstanding.
So those guys are the ones I follow.
Well, I, for one, am pumped and energized and ready to push forward. So I really appreciate your time.
Can I add one closing remark?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes. So we have two things. So one is we have a whole program at our firm that some of you are involved in. Some of you are not yet. We'd like to invite you all to be involved in. We call it our market development program, and it's a whole team and a whole briefing center that we have, which is literally 200 feet that way. So don't go over there tonight. But any time in the future, we would invite you all in, and then all of your teams and your colleagues to come in, and we run basically a whole program around for basically any big company in any industry that plays an important role, which is true of everybody here. What are the areas of technology, innovation, Silicon Valley startups that are most exciting and interesting? And we put together whole customized, curated programs and do a lot of introductions, connections, briefings, and information sharing. And so we want to invite everybody to be a part of that. And then I have 4 colleagues here. I've asked people stand up maybe and raise your hands just so people can tell who you are. We've got Eugen, Sebastian, Marc, and Preethi. Yeah, and so they're running around, and they would be happy to. I would be happy to hook you up with that program, and we would love to see you all at some point.
And I wanted to introduce my colleagues that are here. Stephanie Nagali, stand up, please. She actually got us going like about a year and a half ago, and then Marc Brodeur, who's officially heading up our Silicon Valley outpost. So I hope you take a moment to introduce yourself. But again, this was energizing. Appreciate your perspective, cryptographic as it was. And and we'll be sticking around for side conversation. Drew?
Good. Thanks, everybody.